Good evening all, and welcome. A lot of stuff happened in 2020, a lot of horrifying experiences mostly. Why don't we recall a few of them now? So get comfortable, follow me on Twitter, and let the darkness take control. Wendell was a panhandler near my college. I always gave him my change when I had extra. Usually I keep a hard rule not to give money to individuals because I give it to local known charities instead, where I can be sure the money is going to a specific cause. This one panhandler though, he always sang opera, quite beautifully all things considered, even though it was clear he was begging for money due to poverty and homelessness, not busking for tips. I always thought it was admirable that he was trying to perform a service in exchange for the money. And I don't like carrying coins, so I gave what I could. It wasn't much, barely $1 each time. I would occasionally strike up conversations with Wendell, even if I didn't have any money for him. He liked to make students laugh with funny impressions or jokes. He was a bit older. I'm an undergrad, and he was 40 to 50. So we'd mostly have quick chats about the news or the weather. Nothing deep. Sometimes he'd randomly share something so intimate that I'd feel obligated to reciprocate with something at least superficially personal. E.g., he blurted out that he almost went to college on a baseball scholarship, but drugs ruined everything. I'd be like, "Oh wow, sorry to hear that. I play volleyball, not for a scholarship though. See you around, okay?" Once Wendell called me over while I was walking with a professor / my advisor, and I didn't want to be rude, so I went over to say a quick hello and introduced my advisor. When we walked away, my advisor was pretty horrified and asked why Wendell knew my name. I explained our little friendship. He then said the homeless in the city weren't like the homeless in my smaller town back home. I figured he was being elitist, and think he could tell I hadn't taken him seriously, because after we dropped the subject just before I left, he reiterated that I shouldn't forge friendships with the homeless population in the city, or even give them money, because the chronically homeless, the ones on the streets enough that you could get to know them, tended to have criminal or addictive histories. I was surprised because my advisor was usually pretty progressive and compassionate, so I appealed to him with, "Wendell is a victim of post-capitalist society, and all the other things I'd learnt in his very own classes." But he wasn't having any of it, basically saying however Wendell became chronically homeless, now he was, and I should act accordingly. So my professor strongly implored me not to continue talking to Wendell at all. I kind of shook it off, thinking, okay boomer, and if anything, felt fortified by the warning, like it was a confirmation that I was radical in doing the right thing, leading a new path, breaking down barriers, bettering society. I got closer to Wendell and shared more about my life with him, but the very next time I spoke to Wendell, he was really irritable and distant, and I wasn't sure why, until he said, "So your boyfriend, you two live together or what?" And I had no idea what he was talking about, and I said, "What boyfriend?" "The guy I met yesterday you were talking down the street with." And I laughed, explaining it wasn't my boyfriend, it was my academic advisor. Then all of a sudden, he wasn't irate anymore. He was as chatty as he'd ever been. I probably should have taken this as a red flag, but I didn't think about Wendell much at all then. I only saw him once or twice a week, and only for a few minutes. It was around then that Wendell started bringing me gifts. I'd pass him and he'd have a flower for me or a metal machine piece. I never refused, because I figured it was a means of preserving his dignity while accepting money, like with his opera singing. One of my roommates did remark once on the flower, and when I explained, she said it was weird. I thought she was being just so elitist, and that I was enlightened, bridging the class divide and superior to her neoliberal paranoia. I mean, come on, it was just a flower. My advisor clocked all of this, so brought it up with me again a while later, saying he was worried I was being manipulated. I tried to tell him about Wendell's opera singing and impressions, and how he even almost went to college, but then I remembered the reason he lost his baseball scholarship, and I stopped short. Looking at it through that kind of lens made me reconsider the whole thing. I thought about what my professor had said, sparing the details. We did talk for half an hour, and I finally connected the dots that Wendell did have a history of drug abuse, and he sometimes mentioned how a previous girlfriend, overreacting to something he'd done, had derailed his life besides the drugs, so I decided maybe I should think about distancing myself a little. But very shortly after, the pandemic hit, and classes went virtual. So to save on rent, I went home to my parents' house, still in the state, but not near campus at all. About 3 weeks into being home, I was watching a friend's Insta story when I heard Wendell singing opera in the background, and I thought, I forgot all about him. Hope he's doing okay. And that was that. And I kept watching different stories. Later that night, something about the story kind of stuck in my gut. It had popped into my mind a few times subconsciously and I'd ignored it. But it kept coming back, so I decided to watch it again. That's when I realized my friend's video wasn't from our college town. It was from my much smaller hometown, which is nowhere near college. That freaked me out a little, but I figured everyone moved around when the pandemic hit. My town isn't that small. It isn't that far from college. It must have been a coincidence, right? I really wanted to mention it to my parents, but they had always warned me against talking to the homeless, besides, can I buy you a meal? So I felt too embarrassed to explain the situation to them, especially since it was probably a coincidence, and I would sound so conceited if I were like, he definitely followed me, because aren't I just so great that he's probably obsessed with me? We have a type 1 diabetic in the family, so we took quarantining very seriously. I figured I'll never see him again anyway. I'm not going out anytime soon. It doesn't matter where he is. And nothing happened. Well, one thing. A girl from my high school, who also ended up at my college, called me, and in summary said, "This is gonna sound really weird, but I feel like I should say something. I was downtown and a beggar asked me about you, specifically you. He knew you were on a club volleyball, he knew your major. I didn't tell him anything, but I thought you should know." I was pretty alarmed at first, because how would he know I knew this girl? But once we talked, I learned she'd been wearing a sweatshirt from our college. So I thought about it, and decided he probably saw the sweatshirt, figured she might know me from college since we're both from this town, and was just trying to dig a little deeper and find out how I was doing. Was it sweet? Weird? He was a little weird. That was part of his charm, though. I thanked her but told her not to worry about it. Besides, I wasn't in town much longer anyway. I had decided to go back to live near campus. It was impossible to get my coursework done with my whole family around me all day. So I went back to campus a while later, and didn't think about Wendell at all, until I saw him back on the same corner just a few weeks after I returned. Okay, even I knew at that time that something was wrong. I stopped giving him money, stopped talking to him, but was so humiliated by how high and mighty I had been insisting that nothing was wrong and everyone else was being paranoid and elitist, that I decided not to tell anyone what I had noticed. I was already barely leaving my apartment, never going on campus, and his usual spot was right by campus. I felt bad about potentially hurting his feelings or reading too far into the situation, but I figured he'd get the message, and better safe than sorry. After finals, I decided to visit my brother in a different state. His roommate had moved home, leaving an extra bed, so I drove up to his place to celebrate the end of the year and get away from it all. About the 9th day in, I was woken up way earlier than usual when my brother isn't working or in school, as he sleeps till noon, to the sound of my brother talking at the door. I got up to see what was going on because we weren't seeing anyone, we stayed totally quarantined. His state was being hit hard. My brother was talking nicely to someone outside through a crack in the door, but when he turned, he looked really pissed at me. He turned back outside and said, "Hold on here," closed the door, despite the other guys protesting, but I couldn't hear what he said exactly. My brother immediately got in my face, yelling and whispering, and said, "Mum and Dad are gonna kill you." I had no idea what he was talking about, but my first thought was the cops had come to arrest me for something. It was the only logical thought I could generate first, this early in the morning. The only thing I could imagine being arrested for was my fake ID, which I only even used to get into concerts, and obviously none lately, so I really was in shock. But my brother was still going, as best I can remember, because I was panicked at this point, and he was saying, "I'm gonna kill you. This is not cool. You didn't even ask. I would have said yes anyway, but you didn't even think to ask." I realized that didn't align with being arrested, so I was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You're dating a 40-year-old guy, older, 45 maybe, of all the people out there. And I mean, Jesus, Dad's gonna have a heart attack and die, which will kill Mom. And you invited him to my house while we're supposed to be socially distanced? You two can go to a hotel because he isn't coming in here. I wasn't a dick to him out of respect for you, but if he doesn't leave now, that's gonna change." So I had no idea what he was talking about. None. I hadn't connected any of the pieces yet, because, you've got to remember, Wendell was such a small part of my life until this point. I almost never saw him or thought of him. My whole world had been turned upside down by a pandemic in the preceding few months. He was a background noise. Faint background noise compared to all the other stuff I had going on. So I just said the first thing that came to mind. "Dude, I don't know what you're getting so mad at me about. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone's got the wrong house." My brother looked at me like he was ready to rip my face off, and he went, "We're adults. Come on, don't lie to me. I'm not Mom or Dad. We can't deal with this if you're going to lie to my face." "I'm not lying," I said, and I think he could tell from my expression and tone that I genuinely was serious. So now he was as confused and irritated as I was, and he was like, he didn't just vaguely say he was here for his girlfriend, he used your name. He rattled on a ton of very exact info. I think he said, you guys had a fight and he was here to work things out. Now I've been looking for a boyfriend for a long time, so I was half thinking, maybe dreams do come true. Well, might as well see who it is. But I was also starting to feel a bit sick in the pit of my stomach, because it would be one thing if this happened on campus or back home, but I had changed states. My brother moved into this state for school, and I didn't know anyone here beside his friends and him. So finally, I did the obvious thing and looked through the people. I almost didn't recognize him at first because he had showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothes for the first time since I'd known him. But sure as hell it was Wendell, standing on my brother's doorstep hundreds of miles from his original corner. I was so scared I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding like it was slipping under deep water with my legs tied. I just backed away from the door and sat down on the couch and tried to collect myself. My brother thought this was my affirming that there really was some older secret boyfriend who hadn't made himself known. So it took a minute for him to cut off his rantings and his dramatic, "What will Grandma think?" stuff. Finally, he realized I was tearing up and he sat down, calmed down and apologized and said, "We'd figure it out." And I whispered, still out of breath, "No, you don't understand. He followed me here." My brother still didn't get it. "What, you didn't want him to come? What was your fight about?" he asked, thinking this guy was my boyfriend. I managed to repress my panic enough to explain the broad strokes to him, but I don't think he fully grasped how creepy it was in the moment, because he was like, "You're kidding me. That's hilarious. I'll take care of this." He went to the door and called from behind it, "Yo, just checked, she's not here. Must have packed out this morning. You should do the same. I'm taking this social distance real serious," and winked at me. That's when, as my brother says, when he tells this story, it got real. Wendell said, "You're lying. I heard her in there. Tell her I'm sorry, I don't know why she's been avoiding me, but I got cleaned up for her, and I'll take her anywhere she wants to go. Tell her, and I don't lie. You know if I'll lie." That rubbed my brother the wrong way, and he said, "Bro, you're not taking her anywhere. Now get off my deck before we have a problem." And Wendell sounded like he was walking away, but instead he was going over to the window. When I saw him staring, he looked different than I'd ever seen him, even than a few seconds earlier when I'd glanced through the peephole. His clothes were clean, but they didn't fit or match. Eyes bulged out his head. White stuff caked on the corners of his mouth. I hadn't noticed at first, shaking, just kind of disconnected from reality. He started banging on the window, shouting things like, "That's my girlfriend, you can't keep her in there. Let her out." I couldn't even tell if it was meant as a threat or reassurance. I was so scared. I was too scared to run or move. I think my brother was almost surprised by the sudden outburst. He was rolling up his sleeves like he was pretending to go out there, and I was trying to make my voice work to beg him not to. But I was super anxious, scared, and embarrassed, and said that I had missed all the signs leading up to this, all the opportunities to prevent it, that our friendship was never the wholesome thing I thought it was, though of course that's something I had already begun to grapple with before this day. And I had so many thoughts swirling in my head, fear being chief among them, and all I could do was scream. No words, just scream, and cover my ears to drown the whole situation out. Before my brother could charge out the door, as he's an athletic guy, but I don't think he's ever actually been in a physical fight, Wendell punched through the window. Nothing actually happened when he punched through. I mean, there was an eerie moment of silence when nobody moved. I think I even stopped screaming. But when he pulled his hand back, all hell broke loose. A fair amount of blood started spurting out when he pulled his hand back through the glass. The things he was shouting started to make even less sense, along the lines of, "Look what you did to me! This is a test! I told you I couldn't be stopped!" And the look in his eyes got even more distant. I think the sight of the blood, which has always made my brother really squeamish, made him realize this was real. And he finally yelled, "Damn it, sis, call 911!" while he leaned against the door which Wendell was now repeatedly running into, even though he was nowhere near close to breaking it down. I don't remember making the call, but apparently I did, because within 10 minutes the police arrested Wendell without resistance. He kept trying to tell them that his girlfriend was trapped in the house and he'd come all this way to save her. My poor brother was even momentarily handcuffed and had to explain he hadn't taken me hostage. Probably one of the most haunting memories of this whole event is as they carted Wendell away for arrest, he started singing opera music. I learned a lot of important common sense and life lessons from this saga. But most of all, Wendell, let's not meet. This happened to me a few months ago. I'm a 24-year-old female student from Germany. The place I live in has quite a diverse population, from American soldiers and their families to immigrants from Arabic heritage. We have everything here, hence why it isn't unusual to be approached by people that aren't very fluent in German. So yesterday I had to skip my online class to get out the house to have my horse's feet done, because the guy who does that wants to put his business on hold due to the second lockdown, and was only willing to do it on my horse when I agreed on an appointment yesterday. That's not really important, but I was out and about yesterday, and wearing clothing that were well suitable for getting dirty. I usually take the train to the place my horse is at, and while there is a stop down the hill close to the apartment I live in, I decided to get some groceries as I was already out, and took the same train line back, but got out on the main station instead of my stop. A friend of mine also lives in the same apartment complex as I do, and I decided to ask her if she needed anything from the store so she wouldn't have to go out this week. So when I finally was done and ready to take the bus back, which usually has a stop right in front of our complex, I was loaded with 2 full bags of groceries and a 6-pack of 1.5-litre water bottles, which is important, as I was really packed. I was making my way to the bus stop when I noticed a group of men that were walking in the distance in front of me. I only noticed them because one of them made a point by aggressively spitting and sneezing onto an e-scooter that was in front of a closed store, and then tried to talk up a girl that was walking in the opposite direction of a group. This was already sending some red flags. Not the first time I encountered a group of idiots like that, so I tried keeping my distance and walking as slowly as possible to not pass them. Yeah, that sounds pretty paranoid and probably is, but trust me when I say that I have my experiences and have been in more uncomfortable situations than I want to admit. The group made their way through the train station, which I had to go through. The one who had spat on the e-scooter suddenly split from the group because apparently a bag he was carrying had ripped and the vodka bottle had just fallen out. He fumbled with it while the others walked on. I had to pass him to not stop like a paranoid ass, so I got on the escalator to exit the train station and get to the bus, when he rushed to get to his group again, and just like that he was suddenly next to me. Took on another step towards his group only to turn around and suddenly hold the ripped bag up to my face. I tried not to acknowledge him, which usually does the trick with such guys, but he wouldn't let it slide. He rambled something about the bag and how it dropped his bottle. Honestly, I could barely understand him as his German was so broken. I couldn't pass him on the escalator, and when I finally got off I did my best to directly rush to the bus, which was already waiting. He took that as an opportunity to consistently try and get in front of me, successfully preventing me from getting on the bus in time. At this point I had said nothing to him and didn't even acknowledge him, yet he was still talking to me, standing uncomfortably close. Not just pandemic respect, socially distance uncomfortable, but I can count your nose hairs, please get away from me uncomfortable. And of course he wasn't wearing a mask. He asked my name, something about where I worked, and I couldn't follow because of his bad German. What I might add isn't really the problem here because again, diverse population. We can't expect everyone to speak a language they're just learning, or well, just came into contact with. Heck, my English isn't even that good. Why should I expect a non-native German speaker to do better than I do with other languages? The problem was that he invaded my personal space on top of not respecting the social distance norms. People might say I was rude trying not to acknowledge him in the first place, but that should have been a cue for him to leave. And I'm not ready for conversation. He displayed worrying behavior by spitting and sneezing on the e-scooter and not wearing a mask in public, where it was mandatory, and I really don't want to socialize with someone like that. You guys get me, right? Well, not seeing any opportunity to get rid of him quickly with my bus gone and him particularly glued to my side, I finally spoke. I told him to leave me alone, what he either couldn't understand or simply didn't want to. Either way, he took that as a cue to want to shake my hand, which I declined because A, pandemic, and B, no. He insisted on it, going so far as to try and grab my hand against my will. I repeated my plea for him to leave, which he again ignored, and opted to ask me to take my mask off because he wants to see my pretty face. Of course, I told him I didn't want to do that, and that I wanted to be left alone. I wanted to push him away so badly, but due to me being panicked, that wasn't really an option if I valued the groceries. Despite me being visibly uncomfortable and trying several times to walk away from him, he still didn't take the hint and started to aggressively offer me cigarettes and a bottle of energy drink. He literally wanted me to drink from his already opened bottle. No matter what I did, he followed me, and when I put down one of the 6 packs of water to tighten one of the bags hanging from my shoulder, he started grabbing at it, insisting that he carry it for me. He started a whole ramble about how others from his place, apparently he came from Iraq, all had German friends, but he didn't because everyone over here is a Nazi and just wanted to have German friends to go out for coffee and dinner and teach him the language, all while still trying to grab my bags, which I was holding on for dear life to. Finally, a couple of homeless people came over, as always, and sat at the bus stop, and apparently had noticed what was going on, and called me over and asked about my shirt and where I got it. I gladly took the opportunity to engage with them in the hopes that the creep would leave me alone, but surprise, surprise, he didn't. While I was still trying to talk to other people, he consistently got in front of me, waving his hands around to prevent me from making eye contact with anyone else. He literally jumped between me and others, pressing cigarettes from his opened energy drink in their hands, everything to prevent them from speaking to me. Not just that, he constantly urged me to get away from them because they all just drink all day, which is no good. pretty much what he said. I was quite confident at this point his group has left him behind. Well, at least I didn't notice them around anymore. In the end, the couple just couldn't keep up the conversation with me due to the aggressive interruptions from him, and them being, well, a little drunk, left. But they bought me some time, so the next bus would be there in a mere 4 minutes. I still opted to sit on the bench, placing my bags and the six-pack next to me so there would be no room for him to sit, in hopes to finally get some distance between him and me. Again, he was up close and personal from the start. He simply took my bags without asking, and not just sat down as close to me as possible, arms and legs touching, but he held onto my bags, stating that he helps me to carry them. I told him that I needed my bags back because my bus was coming soon, to which he replied that he would give me my bags if I gave him my number. He held his pack of cigarettes and a pen up to me and wanted me to write them on there. Reluctantly, and knowing that he probably wouldn't take no for an answer, I wrote down an old number of mine which I sincerely hope hasn't been given out again. Then he insisted on my name, saying he wants to take me out for dinner tonight at his place, as all restaurants are of course closed due to lockdown and can't do that if he doesn't know my name. I added a fake name which apparently satisfied him, but he still held onto my bags and started rambling about how badly he wants to take me out for dinner or drinks, and that he likes me, even going so far as to say he loved me, which to be fair just could be a bad translation to German. Despite that, I told him, you don't tell people you love them just like that, which of course he ignored, going on how my looks are so good, blah blah blah. To say I'm conventionally attractive is a lie. I'm slightly overweight, have a shaved side cut, and only wear extra baggy band shirts, and yesterday even muddy track pants. Not quite the get-up that catches people's eye in a positive way. I caught his eye, and now I'm his best friend. Apparently. Anyway, that could be a bad translation. He even ignored my remark about being busy all the time, insisting that today or tomorrow he wants to meet me again. And the while he was literally breathing right in my face, even trying to take down my face mask. The 4 minutes it took for the bus to arrive at the station were the longest 4 minutes of my life. But it finally came, and I aggressively ripped my bags from him and rushed to get in. I nearly even forgot to show my ticket to the driver, but thinking that it would get rid of him, but I was wrong again. He followed me in, trying to insist on paying for my ticket. I'm so very lucky that we get a student ticket at my uni, because otherwise I would have had to tell the driver where I wanted to get one. Again, I might be just a bit paranoid, but I kinda was thinking he was hoping I would reveal the general location of my apartment, or at least give him an indicator of which ticket he needed to buy so he could ride with me. I showed my ticket, and even though he was right behind me, I rushed to the back of the bus, hoping that this would finally get rid of him. But again, the hope was quickly shattered. He insisted to the bus driver that I was his friend, and that he apparently needed to tell me something. He even put on a mask out of nowhere so he could just get on. And he did. He got on the bus without paying, walked to where I was seated, and started to beg for my confirmation that I would go out with him to dinner tonight or tomorrow, and that we could even have some drinks. I told him I didn't have time. And then, finally, the bus driver, through the intercom, told him to get off, which luckily he did. I'm sorry for the school kids there who had to witness me loudly swearing all known religious figures for finally blessing me with being able to get rid of the guy. He still stood outside the bus and waved at me as we drove off, but I was just so relieved he couldn't follow me anymore. Turns out I forgot my 6-pack of water on the bench. A good part of the eggs were destroyed, and apparently I lost a pack of dry yeast somewhere along the way, which is infuriating, but at the same time I'm just glad he didn't know where I lived. This horror story may not be as drastic or dramatic or horrifying as others, but it's the first time I felt really scared by such an encounter. This man might have just been desperate for having a local friend who could help better his German, but the way he was going about it was just so wrong. I don't know if this is normal in his culture, and frankly, I don't care. Don't get in my personal space when I don't know you, and don't ignore a "leave me alone." You automatically become someone I don't want in my social circle, no matter where you're from. Don't push yourself onto others like that. Gosh. I live in a block of flats. It's a bit of a rough area in my opinion, which occasionally has some sketchy characters going about. There are 2 buildings, and in one of them is a washroom where the residents all go to use the washing/drying facilities. I'm a 31-year-old woman and use these facilities not as often as I'd like to, because more often when I go, the same guy just keeps appearing. The washroom is usually busy. It can take a few visits to go at a time when the machine is not in use. Despite that, it's very rare to ever see anyone down there. There's no one person I've ever seen in there twice, except a man who's always washing his teddies. The first time I saw him, he didn't say much. He looked like someone you'd give a wide berth. He was visibly twitching and possibly had learning difficulties and didn't really say anything. Until one time, after a few run-ins, he took his teddy out the machine, held it up like Mr. Bean and said, "Hello," to me through the teddy. I can't really remember my reaction. I know that when I responded, I tried to be as nice as possible, considering he probably has learning difficulties and could need a special approach. By now I've been here for 2 years, and he's the only person who keeps reoccurring in the washroom, and this time I'm in there before he is. He's standing at the door and I try to make polite conversation. I'm busy doing my laundry while he stood at the door with his full attention on me, and as he speaks he sounds normal. His tone and demeanor is different to the way he normally is. He talks about how awful lockdown is, tells me where he works and that he still has to work. You know, normal stuff. After a moment had passed, he quite firmly and in an irate tone says, "I'm just going to be socially distant." I apologize and give him plenty of room to get by. He goes to his machine besides mine, takes out a teddy from his laundry and again, like before, speaks through his teddy. I was about done filling the machine at this point, told him to take care and left, feeling very rattled with this strange change in character from the man who spends all the time washing his teddies. When I returned to the washroom to put my clothes in the dryer, I'd taken my time to return, maybe 2 hours or so, as I didn't want to run into the guy again by going back at the same time. However, when I got there, someone had been in before me and removed my clothes. They had been all thrown out and down the back of the washer. Definitely not by accident. This freaked me out. I picked it all up, threw it in the dryer, and rushed back to my flat and told my boyfriend what had just happened. He told me not to go back tonight and that he'd go finish it off. However, he'd just started cooking, so it was a long while before he returned. When he went to the dryer I'd put our clothes in, they too had been removed and thrown all down the back of the dryers. Nothing else in the washroom had been tampered with. To me, this was a targeted attack. The first instance, I thought maybe someone had had a bad day, but with hours between my moves and my clothes being targeted, I felt directly threatened. I know this could be a coincidence, or it could be nothing, but my instincts tell me something more sinister could be going on, and could have been going on for a while. With no real evidence, I can't raise the alarm to the police, but I'm very scared, and I'm going to continue documenting this. What do you guys think? I live in an apartment complex right next to a 7-Eleven, literally a 2-minute walk from my door. So since all this quarantine lockdown mess, I've been staying up later than usual till maybe 2 or 3 a.m. most nights. And last night, it was a little after 12, when I had a taste for some chips and decided I'll just go across the street to 7-Eleven, which is something I do frequently. So I make my way over, and on my way I had to pass this man who was browsing on the red box kiosk. I don't think much of it. I go inside, get some snacks, pay, head out the door, and as I'm coming out, the red box man is literally staring dead at me with these scarily bright eyes. Not wanting to freak myself out even more, I say to myself, maybe he's just zoned in thought. I wandered into La La Land myself sometimes, so by thinking that, I was trying to make myself more comfortable having to walk past this strange man. So I'm heading back to my apartment complex, which is on the side of the street, and has a creaky gate. I realize I was walking and never heard it slam behind me like I always did. I look back, and this man is right behind me, not close up but definitely following. Once again, trying to ease my mind, I'm thinking maybe he's just going home, but I also noticed he didn't have any disc in his hand, for as such as he was at the kiosk for the whole time I was in the store, taking my sweet, indecisive time. So not wanting to come off as scared, I keep my distance and pace, but I probably should have sprinted because, well, being nice. Anyway, I'm literally just a few steps from my door, which is upstairs, and the man randomly calls out, "Hey, do you have a lighter?" Out of instinct, I turn my head to the fact that I knew someone was speaking to me and respond, "No, sorry." I didn't want to just go upstairs because I didn't want to let this man know exactly where my apartment was, so I planned on walking around until I lost him. But then he asked me another question, if he could use my bathroom. I tell him no, that my roommate would be uncomfortable with me letting someone else in this late. I mean, I don't have a roommate, but I didn't want that man knowing that. I keep walking, but this man was still following me. "Do you live around here?" I ask. "I have a buddy that doesn't. I was supposed to meet across the way, but maybe he fell asleep." "I've never been here before, but I do know his door's 201. Could you help me find it?" Then I think, 211 is my door. Plus, if you have a friend that lives over here, why are you asking to use my bathroom? I knew this man was lying and up to something, and I quickly came with, 201? That should be right past the pool right next to the laundry area. My friends are waiting for me, so I should get going. My gut told me to head to my car though, because what if he watched me, where I was going, and decided to give me a surprise later on? No, I'd watched too many movies and read too many stories. So I started heading towards the parking lot, not running but definitely walking quicker than before. When I realize he's chasing me, I hurry up, pull my keys out my pocket, get into my car and immediately lock the doors. The man begins pounding on my window, telling me to open the door. I can't help but focus on those creepy blue eyes, but then I notice he was reaching for his pocket. I start my car up before I could see what it was, and I heard a pop, and didn't give a damn at that moment so long as I was away from him. I drove maybe 5 minutes down the street to the Acro gas station and called the cops. Waiting on the police to arrive, I noticed what the popping sound was. The wacko popped my back tire, probably with a switchblade. Of course, when the police arrived and went to check the area, the guy was gone. They did question the 7-Eleven clerk, and he let them know that the man has been there a few times since last week, but has never been a problem but is obviously homeless. I'm still shaken up about it, and I'm going to stop the late night 7-Eleven visits from now on. I'm a 20-year-old female, and the story that I'm going to share with you happened recently. I've had many creepy encounters and experienced a lot of truly scary things during my life, so I figured you guys would appreciate this story too. I and my mother decided to go grocery shopping together 2 days ago, so we took the car and she, as I don't have a license yet, drove to the nearest and biggest mall to get many supplies as possible. Because of the ongoing lockdown for the pandemic, it's better to make a few trips to avoid unnecessary contact with people. It took us a while to arrive there, and once we did, she pulled up near the stores where I could see a couple of men. It is very common in my area to find people stationed in malls and supermarket parking lots, as they usually are quite harmless if you do as they say. They stay there waiting for cars to come, and when this happens they show the driver some parking spots to ask what is called a protection fee. Basically, you pay them, otherwise they will damage your vehicle. It is of course illegal, but the government here doesn't really seem to be bothered by these kind of activities. Anyway, we met those illegal workers many times before, so it wasn't anything too unusual or scary for us at first. My mother parked the car and then 2 of the men came near her window and asked for the fee, which wasn't much, luckily. While she was giving them the money, I looked at the side and was staring, and then froze. There were at least 10 other men. 2 of them were fighting. I didn't know over what. One threw a punch, and only when I looked closer did I see something shiny in his hand. It was a knife. I started freaking out internally because of the situation. It was way more dangerous than it seemed at the beginning. The worst scenarios were running through my head. 2 women, 10 men with a weapon? It then brought me back to reality when my mother told me to get out the car to reach the store. So immediately I jumped out my seat and got to her side, ready to protect her. But when I saw she was chatting and exchanging jokes with one of the 2 dudes from before, I realized that she hadn't seen the group of men that was approaching us. My mum has a very sunny and friendly personality, which, let me tell you, can be a very dangerous thing around strangers. And I'm not blaming her, I love my mum, but an excessive, expansive attitude can cost you a lot. I know I sometimes come off as an antisocial, but better to be careful and distant than have a knife in your throat. I quickly told her we had to go with urgency in my voice, but kept a cold and firm tone. If you show people you're scared, then you're screwed. She followed me, asking what was wrong and trying to tell me that we were safe, so I whispered, "Keep going and stay silent." And only then did she see the group of men staring at us. She proceeded to look in the other direction while walking, but I didn't get it. I gave one of the men a full look of hatred that was screaming, "Don't try and harm us or I'll fight you." I know they were numerically superior, but I have been doing boxing for years and I wasn't going down without a fight. The man got the message and looked away. It was still broad daylight, so if I screamed, people would hear us and the cops, plus criminals prefer it, as I said before, to make easy targets. I hadn't brought any weapons with me that day, but I'll make sure never to make that mistake again. When we got out the mall, it was getting dark. I suggested a secondary way to get to the car. The men were all still in the parking lot. There was a little light and we also had a lot of things to carry. We made it to the vehicle safely because they didn't see us coming, but I swear I'm never going out without some form of protection again. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't looked out the window or my mum hadn't listened to me. So just please, guys, always be wary of your surroundings. Back in late March, my girlfriend and I moved out of a house we rented with our 2 roommates, our pandemic bubble, C and J, and they moved into their own place on the other side of town. One couple usually visits the other at least weekly, time permitting, and this instance in April was the first time they'd spent time in our new apartment. We'd been fairly isolated in the small community we'd lived in before, as we were one of the last few to move out while they were condemning the properties due to disrepair. Therefore, we weren't used to having neighbours anymore. We'd had a casual interaction with one woman that lived next door while we were moving, and she complimented both our hair colours, and we knew we had an upstairs neighbour, but this was the extent of our familiarity. That is until this night in April, when we were all interrupted by a knock at the door. It was a heavy-set bearded man that lived upstairs, whom we'd never actually seen before, but occasionally would hear talking or watching TV if things were quiet enough. The guy asked if any of us had a phone, and upon realizing 3 of us either didn't bring it or didn't have enough charge for a cell phone, C offered to let him use hers while they stepped outside for a moment. The rest of this is mostly an account from her and her boyfriend, as they were the ones outside, but we could faintly hear what was going on. My understanding is that the man dialed the number, pulled out a notebook, scribbled with various pandemic-related things, then alluded to the voicemail system that he had information for the United States government on what was going on regarding said pandemic. But the part that shocked all 4 of us was when we all heard him reciting what looked like a Bible verse in tongues that he'd also written down. He seemed polite and casual before all of this, interacting and greeting with us with a "Hey neighbours," and thanking C and J for letting them call. So this had us all shaken up when they came back in and told us the specifics. We were curious and called the number saved in her recents, and we looked into C's cell phone, and the number and area code looked so unfamiliar to us, in addition to the mention of the government and secretive behaviour, that one of us decided to look the number up. We found out that not only was it based in Washington, D.C., but it was the number that matched NASA's headquarters there. Now, we're not exactly sure why he thought NASA was the authority to go on here, but needless to say, when he came back the next morning asking if either my girlfriend or I had a cigarette he could bum, I had to force the memory of him speaking backwards into NASA voicemail out of my head, and it was still a super uncomfortable experience. We haven't seen the guy since, and his apartment has been vacant since a few weeks after this. Wonder what happened to him. I was minding my own business today at the dollar store, stoned off my arse looking for some candy. I tend to look down when I'm in public places like stores, as I'm socially anxious and don't like people talking to me, so I really didn't notice the guy at first. But then it was hard not to, because he kept pacing up and down the aisles, grabbing packages of cookies and putting them back, acting really shifty and weird. I walked by him as he mumbled something to me about being hungry. I looked up at him and gave a fake laugh to be polite. He was white and bald with a tattoo on the back of his head, and as I walked past him he said, "Damn girl," and looked up at me and down and smiled. I ignored him and kept looking for the candy. He striked up a conversation with me saying, "Yeah, just got out 3 days ago. Did 25 years. "Wow, what for?" "Murder," he said matter-of-factly, and looked right at me and smiled. I started to panic a bit internally but played it cool. He asked me where I was from and what I was doing there. I told him I was from Texas and visiting my boyfriend. My boyfriend lives in a small town about an hour outside the big city I live in, so keep in mind this is a small town within Texas. "Oh, I'm from California, just got here," and winked at me. "That's cool." I then walked to the register. He didn't even give me the 6 feet. He stood so close to me in the line I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I said, "Dude, give me 6 feet. I don't know what diseases you have from the pen." He was like, "What, the coronavirus? You think that's serious?" "Absolutely." And then I walked out the store. Luckily, there were 2 other employees sitting out front who I told what was going on. One of them walked me to my car as a cop was passing by, and I've never been so relieved to see one in my life. And he walked up to us as I was getting in my car and telling her goodbye and bummed a cigarette off her. I got in my car so quick and locked the door immediately. He seemed like he was trying to get in the passenger side when I locked the door, but he just walked off and started looking around the parking lot. I burned off so quickly. "Mr. Murderer, don't you know that it creeps girls out when you tell them you just did 25 years for killing someone? Seriously, let's not meet." This happened a few months back around March, about the time the world really entered stage 1 of the pandemic. The bank I needed had closed down all the main offices and had limited its hours from 10 to 4. Because my old debt had expired for the bank, I had to go in and get a new one to put money down on my credit card. Of course, since it was the only bank of this company open, there was a huge line. Getting to the end, I nodded to the person ahead of me and simply focused on the story I was reading on my app. I'd only been standing there about 5 minutes when someone else got behind me. His clothes looked dirty and he had a smell to him. I assumed he was homeless since we were in the downtown area of my city, but I gave him a smile and a nod and tried to get back to my book. But he didn't let me. He suddenly mentioned he had been bit by a dog. At first I thought he was just making conversation, but then I looked at his hands. It was wrapped in tissue, but the finger that had been damaged had a decently long cut from the second knuckle to the nail bed. The tissue was covered in blood. He said how I had attacked him suddenly and tried to step closer to me. I told him to please step back, and he took that as an insult and stated that it wasn't infected. I told him it was social distancing, not the cut, but that he should probably get it looked at before trying to go to a bank. We live in Canada, so we should have just gone to the ER. It's free after all. He stated he needed to just get his money and leave. He then turned away to the person behind him in line. We stood in line for 35 minutes before I was finally able to talk to the security guard who was just inside the door. I explained to them a guy behind me had an open wound from a dog, but I had tried to tell him that he shouldn't come in here. The security guard grabbed the manager, and they went out and explained that he was unable to enter until he had cleaned it up, as it was a biohazard. The manager even let him know once it was cleaned, he would be rushed to the front of the line, and he saw me inside and gave me the dirtiest look before storming off. I was walking towards the station to get my train home. I missed the last one, so I had to wait a full hour. Because of the coronavirus, there aren't that many trains anymore, and I decided to call a friend of mine to kill time. When I walked down the stairs to the platform, a guy who was sitting next to the bike rack stood up and followed me. I went to sit at a bench and put my bag next to me. The guy who was following me walked even closer at first, and I thought nothing of it. He surely was going to pass me, right? At 2 meters distance, he locked eyes with me, grinned, and walked straight towards me, sitting next to me on my bag while grinning at me. Our shoulders touched, that's how close we were sitting. Keep in mind this was recent and during the pandemic, We were still the only ones at the station and the train wouldn't be coming for a long time. I did the most logical thing when someone strange sits on your bag, jerked my bag away from him and walked a bit further away while swearing at him for a bit. My mate went on to tell me some personal stuff on the phone, so I didn't want a stranger hearing that, so I walked over to the next bench. When I sat down, I saw the guy stand up immediately and walk over to me. He was trying to get my attention, leaning into my view, grinning and waving all the while. When he started coming closer again, I flipped him off, and really should have said piss off, especially in these dangerous times, and walked past him. This time I positioned myself so I could see him approach me as soon as he stood up. Luckily he didn't try anything else. Now I'm wondering why the hell he was even trying in the first place. Creep. I usually go to church with my mum and sister, and last night we went to the Saturday service. After that we carpooled into my mum's car to get some food and then came back to the parking lot a few hours later to drop me off at my car. It was probably 9 PM at this point and we were still in the parking lot, just talking and catching up when we noticed a truck kind of drive around like a maniac. We ignored it until he sped past our car and then immediately stopped and backed up. The guy gets out and runs up to our car and my mum rolls down the window and the first thing this guy says is everyone has hand sanitizer since we're in a pandemic and he needs some. My poor mum was probably freaking out a bit, and it was a little weird to open up with that, but okay. Then he starts saying the service was really good, but quickly walks up next to her. Then he, I don't know, reminds her to give her hand sanitizer. My poor mum is scrambling through her purse and I try to shoot closer and told her to hold on to her arm with my key between my fingers. She finally finds it, pours some into his hand, and he kind of stays there for a second and says he needs more. And as she pours more, he asks for more, and then lingers for a second and kind of walks quickly back to his truck. He stays there for 5 to 10 minutes before driving away, and it really creeped us out, especially my mum. It was like a weird mix of that sugar scene from Men in Black and Ted Bundy, wearing a cast to look less than threatening, talking about church to calm her down. I mean, who knows? I think I listen to way too much true crime stuff, so I might just be paranoid about strangers. But it really freaked me out when he was holding his hands out for more sanitizer, like he was thinking about grabbing her hand each time she poured it out, and staying there idle for 10 minutes. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Not gonna lie, I'm kind of running out of material, but I'm gonna work hard on getting some more. I think I've only got enough for like 1 or 2 videos left. Not good. It is Pandora's birthday tomorrow, so it's going to be a comp tomorrow and a comp the day after. You've been forewarned. I didn't release one earlier this week because I was too tired to operate. And it should have come out on Wednesday, but I think I did a video on that day because I think I skipped Tuesday. Oh, and I can't even remember anymore. In any case, the comp didn't come out. Oh, it's supposed to come out on Thursday, that's right. In any case, double comp this week, like it should be, but you know, just like changed around because I want to enjoy my daughter's birthday and have a nice weekend with her. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's story. It's a bit of a mix, mostly really let's not meet stuff if I'm honest. But I wanted to make a video about pandemic stories, but I thought it'd be insensitive to use pandemic in the title, and I know YouTube flags that a lot. And they're not really like super related to the pandemic, they just happened to happen last year, so I was like, 2020 stories. Let's call it that. Alright then guys, I wonder if 2020 will ever become a verb. Like, oh man, that's so 2020. Okay, can you imagine? That'd be weird, be funny. And all the young kids won't really know what it means because they never lived it. Maybe it'll happen. Why don't we try and spread it? Or maybe not. Up to you guys. Right, I'm going to leave it here now. This has rambled for far too long and my voice is slowly dying. Stay awesome and I'll see you in the next one.